It is October 4th, 1951, at the Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, where a young woman has died of cervical cancer. She is buried in an unmarked grave in her family's cemetery in Halifax County, Virginia. Like too many women before and since, 31-year-old Henrietta Lacks was taken from this world long before her time. Nobody, least of all Henrietta herself, had any idea that she would one day play a vital role in saving millions of people's lives all over the world. The story of Henrietta Lacks is as much the story of a bright scientific miracle as it is the shadow that comes with all great flashes of light. Henrietta Lacks was born to Johnny and Eliza Pleasant in Roanoke, Virginia on August 1, 1920. The large Pleasant family lived in the house that once stood here at 1102 Norfolk Avenue, Southwest. Henrietta's mother Eliza died while giving birth to her 10th child in 1924. Unable to adequately care for all his children alone after Eliza's death, Henrietta's father moved the family to Clover in Halifax County to be close to relatives. Henrietta spent her formative years in this log cabin with her grandparents, which was once slave quarters on the plantation owned by Henrietta's white great-grandfather. Here the family worked as sharecroppers, toiling in tobacco fields where, at the age of 16, Henrietta married her first cousin, David Lacks, with whom she would ultimately bear 5 children. Just a few months after the birth of their 5th child, Henrietta complained of vaginal bleeding and visited the renowned gynecologist Dr. Howard Jones at Johns Hopkins University, which at that time was one of the few hospitals willing to treat poor African Americans. Dr. Jones discovered a large malignant tumor on Henrietta's cervix and diagnosed her with cervical cancer. In a far cry from the medical technology we are familiar with today, Henrietta was treated with radium tube inserts. During one such treatment, Dr. Jones took 2 samples of cells from Henrietta for the purposes of medical study without her knowledge or consent, which in 1951 the law did not require. Despite the treatments, Henrietta's cancer metastasized and claimed her life at just 31 years of age. One of Henrietta's tissue samples was referred to Johns Hopkins University's Cancer Research Center. Doctors at Johns Hopkins had been collecting cells from patients with cervical cancer for years, regardless of race or social class. Most of these cells being analyzed by researchers lived for only a few days, which hindered extensive study. However, it was quickly noticed that Henrietta's cells reproduced at a very high rate and could be kept alive long enough to undertake extensive study. They became known as HeLa cells, the product of combining the first 2 letters of Henrietta's first and last names. Rather than selling and profiting from them, Johns Hopkins University offered HeLa cells freely and widely for the benefit of scientific research. The scientific knowledge gained from rapidly reproducing cells led to a number of medical breakthroughs. HeLa cells were instrumental in developing the polio vaccine, and have been directly responsible for advancements in researching cancer, AIDS, gene mapping, and the effect of radiation, as well as human sensitivity to tape, glue, cosmetics, and countless other products. The immense number of human lives that have been directly saved or vastly improved by developments made possible by HeLa cells cannot be understated. In the early 1970s, a large portion of cell cultures became mistakenly mixed with HeLa cells. In an effort to try and differentiate the HeLa cells from the other cells, researchers began contacting the family of Henrietta Lacks, requesting blood samples. The Lacks family was hitherto entirely unaware that the scientific community had been using Henrietta's cells for research. No one had granted consent for Henrietta's cells to be harvested and used in this manner, as the law did not require any such permission in the 1950s. While quick to point out that no contemporary laws relating to informed consent were broken, Johns Hopkins University has also been forthright in acknowledging regret that the Lacks family were not informed or involved in the story of Henrietta's cells. In 1990, the Supreme Court of California ruled on a similar issue in Moore v. Regents of the University of California, in which the court determined that a person's discarded tissue and cells are no longer their property and can be commercialized. However, In the years since the discovery of HeLa cells, the Lacks family's medical records were published without consent, and the DNA sequence of the genome of a strain of HeLa cells have also been published, raising objections from the Lacks family about their medical privacy. In August of 2023, the biotechnology company Thermo Fisher Scientific settled a lawsuit with the Lacks family over their claim that the company had been unjustly enriched by its use of HeLa cells.
It's amazing to find out that your grandmother's cells are used in makeup and used for dog food. I mean, any and everybody in this space have someone, or maybe you, have used or bought or benefited from the HeLa cell.
Although a judge issued no ruling over the fundamentals of the case, many suspect it may still become a precedent in future court cases that could affect legislation surrounding medical privacy and commercialization of patient tissue. The story of Henrietta Lacks first gained widespread notoriety in the spring of 1976, after an article about her appeared in the Detroit Free Press. Since then, her story has drifted deeper toward the limelight. The British Broadcasting Corporation aired a documentary about Henrietta Lacks in 1998.
These are Henrietta Lacks' cells filmed 6 weeks later. Each cell is now dividing every 20 hours. For any cancer, it was a record growth rate.
In 2010, Rebecca Skloot published a book entitled The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, upon which was based the 2017 film by that same title. Through innumerable songs, plays, articles, and other forms of media, the story of Henrietta Lacks continues to work its way into the public consciousness, fueled by its elements of scientific intrigue as much as its tinge of bitter unfairness that characterizes so much of the world we live in. A few years after Henrietta's death, the William Watts chapter of the United Daughters of the Confederacy broke ground on a new memorial in downtown Roanoke. Dedicated to the memory of Confederate General Robert E. Lee, the 10-foot-tall granite obelisk was one of more than 800 Confederate memorials and statues that had been erected across the South. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, attitudes toward the memory of the Confederacy had shifted. To some, the many Confederate monuments peppered throughout the South still honored the sacrifices of men who valiantly fought a losing battle in a devastatingly brutal Civil War. To others, the monuments had come to represent the glorification of a deeply racist past, defined by white supremacy and rigid class distinction. After the murder of George Floyd in 2020, Confederate monuments in cities from Atlanta to Richmond became epicenters of a summer of mass protests and riots that precipitated a nationwide debate on racial injustice. In June of that year, the Roanoke City Council followed the example of many other cities who had begun to dismantle Confederate monuments and voted to start the legal process to remove the Robert E. Lee Memorial in Lee Plaza. However, before the statue could be legally and professionally dismantled, Roanoke resident William Foreman lashed ropes around the granite obelisk and pulled it down with a truck. The memorial in Lee Plaza was one of more than 100 Confederate monuments dismantled or destroyed since the summer of 2020. 2 years later, it was announced that a statue of Henrietta Lacks would be erected on the site of the former Robert E. Lee Memorial. Local sculptor Larry Bechtel was commissioned with bringing Lacks' likeness to life. Bechtel had already proven his value as a gifted artist with his Officer Down sculpture, located outside the Roanoke City Police Department, dedicated to law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty. Artist Bryce Cobbs worked with Bechtel to capture a suitable image of Lacks, aided in part by modeling from members of the Lacks family. And in October 2023, a simple yet powerful bronze statue was unveiled on the spot where the Robert E. Lee Memorial had once stood. Not very far away from Henrietta Lacks Plaza, the Lacks family home on Norfolk Avenue was demolished in November 2019. Realizing the home's historical significance only at the 11th hour, local historians attempted to stop the demolition, but it was too late. A home of tremendous historical value in a city with comparatively few memorials to its African American heritage was lost forever. The The story of Henrietta Lacks continues to fascinate for the many unresolved questions it involves that are with us in our own time as much as in Henrietta's time, particularly those relating to medical privacy, the immense and often unchecked power of the pharmaceutical industry, and the specter of racial inequity that still haunts the American South. Some years after her death, a headstone was erected in the Lacks family cemetery, in the vicinity of where it is thought Henrietta rests. One line of the stone's epitaph reads, "Her immortal cells will continue to help mankind forever."